All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some really cool stuff you sent over. It's all about making machines safer and more efficient in the workplace, which is super important, right?
Mhm.
So basically, how do we design and interact with these machines in a way that, well, helps prevent accidents and just makes everything run smoother? I mean, think about all those times when a tiny design tweak could have avoided a whole mess. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Your sources really highlight how these little design choices can make a huge difference. We're talking about things like making sure you don't accidentally switch something on, that emergency stops are easy to get to when you really need them, being able to tell different controls apart instantly, and just making sure everything is in a comfortable spot. Basically, designing a workspace that works with you, not against you.
Right, exactly. So let's dive into that first point about those accidental activations. I mean, it's amazing how easy it is to hit the wrong button, especially if things are all crammed together. What are some ways we can design things better to avoid that?
Well, one of the simplest things is just to give those important controls a bit more space, but it's not just about spacing, right? Think about using recessed buttons or even putting those covers, like those cages they talk about in your sources, over controls that could get bumped accidentally. And even the way a control works matters. Sometimes, instead of just a simple push, you can make it so you have to pull or turn something, which can really help stop those accidental operations.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like, finding that balance between making things secure, but also easy to use when you need them. Like, you don't want to make it impossible to shut something down in an emergency.
Hmm.
And speaking of emergencies, your sources also mention how crucial it is to have those must-have controls, the power off and the emergency stop, in a spot that's separate from the usual controls, but still super quick to reach. And hey, if a control never gets used, maybe it shouldn't even be there in the first place, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us right to the topic of emergency controls. When things go wrong, you need to react fast, like without even thinking. Your sources really stress how these controls have got to be really obvious. Easy to spot, simple to reach from where you're normally working, and they got to be big and clearly marked, usually with that bright red color.
Yeah, you got to be able to find them even if you can't even look. And it's cool that your sources bring up these alternative emergency options too, like dead man switches that cut the power if you let go,
Hmm.
or those automatic systems with trip cords and pressure mats. It's all about having these layers of protection, just in case.
For sure. And if we're talking about preventing errors in the first place, being able to tell different controls apart is a huge deal. Your sources go into some really clever ways to do this, like using different colors, sizes, even shapes for different functions. It sounds basic, but it's a really effective way to avoid making mistakes.
Yeah, and clear, simple labels are key, especially using the local language. And I really like this idea of standardizing the layout of common controls across machines. So, if you're familiar with one machine, you can pretty much figure out another one. Oh, and the connection between a control and what it actually does needs to be really obvious, like put the indicator right next to the dial, that kind of thing.
Yep. Right, right. And let's not forget about the people actually using this equipment. How comfortable are they? Your sources really emphasize the ergonomics of reaching controls. Placing frequently used controls at about elbow height and right in front of the operator can make a world of difference. Less strain, smoother work.
It's all about those primary and secondary hand movement zones, right? The things you use constantly should be super easy to reach. No awkward stretching or anything. And even the controls you don't use as often should still be accessible without a problem. Sometimes a simple adjustment to the workstation height or the machine itself can make a huge difference over a whole day of work.
So, to wrap things up, we've talked about avoiding accidental starts, making sure those emergency stops are super accessible, making it easy to tell controls apart, and putting them in comfortable spots. These principles, all drawn from your sources, are really the foundation of a safer and more productive work environment. It's all about putting the human at the center of the design.
That's so true. And it makes me think, we've been focusing on machinery, but think about all the everyday things around us, even outside of work. Look at your phone, your kitchen gadgets, your car. What are some of those tiny design details that make them so easy and safe to use? It's kind of cool to see how these principles pop up everywhere.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it makes you realize how much thought actually goes into good design, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for sending in such great material. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
And to our listeners, keep those design principles in mind. You might be surprised by what you notice. We'll see you next time on the deep dive.